So The Mandalorian Season 2, my most anticipated TV series of this fall, is finally here, and it's come and it's gone, and it's been awesome. Because The Mandalorian is a Star Wars property, and because half the people on the planet seem to love Star Wars, myself included, I assume most of the people that want to watch this series have already watched it. Because of that, I will not hesitate to include spoilers, you've been warned. If you're on the fence about whether or not you want to watch this series, just watch it, it's worth it, I promise. This review will mostly just be my thoughts, my opinions, what I think about the series. If you don't care about that, why are you watching? If you're new here and you're unfamiliar with how I do my reviews, I break it down by plot, character, and theme. If you want to skip ahead to a certain part of the review, I'll put the time codes for the subjects I'm talking about in the comments. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Let's dive right into the plot. For this season, the primary thing I like is how there's less clear-cut filler in story. No episode is 100% a filler episode or 100% a side quest, and no episode is necessarily 100% a main storyline episode. While I'll admit that the side quests do get a little bit tedious, each episode has its own unique identity and characteristics that help it feel unique and special. Ludwig Göransson's score is fire once again. It manages to sound distinctly Star Wars while also not sound like it's trying to emulate John Williams. Once again, this series shows off how far television technology has progressed. The production design, special effects, costuming, etc. It's all movie quality. I also like how this series, especially this season, lets its various directors experiment with style while never feeling inconsistent tonally. We saw a little bit of that last season with the scene in Taika Waititi's episode where the stormtroopers try and shoot the whatever it is, the can or whatever, and continually miss. That style of humor was very Taika Waititi, but this season leans even more into it, with each director adding their own flavor to their respective episodes. Because each episode of this season is so unique, I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is break this season down episode by episode. Starting with Chapter 9, The Marshal. This episode was a Tremors-inspired monster movie. It introduces a fun new character with Timothy Oliphant's Cobb Vanth. This episode also introduces lots of interesting lore about the Tusken Raiders, while at the same time not feeling like it's retconning their previous appearances. This series has some great CGI and really shows off the show's budget. It was fun to see Amy Sedaris again. I didn't really care for her character last season, but this season I think she's better. Jon Favreau's direction was pretty solid, although I'll admit he's a lot better at directing dialogue scenes than he is action scenes. While this episode could just feel like a filler side quest, it sets up threads that are paid off later in the season. As I said before, Mando meets Peli Motto again, who introduces him to the Frog Lady next episode. He acquires Boba Fett's armor, which leads Boba Fett to track him down. We also get our first look at Boba Fett, who plays a pivotal role later in the season. Let's move on to Chapter 10, The Passenger. This episode is Peyton Reed's creature feature, basically. It's the most disposable and feels the most like just a filler episode. The new character, the unnamed Frog Lady, has pretty much no character development. Peyton Reed's direction feels really awkward. There's a subplot about Baby Yoda eating the Frog Lady's eggs, and I'm not really sure if it's supposed to be comedic or not. This episode does do the things that this show does well though. The CGI is good, the action is good, all the technical stuff is good, and it's fun to see Dave Filoni have a little cameo. Moving on to Chapter 11, The Heiress, we get to see Bo-Katan again. Katie Sackhoff does a good job, and we get to learn more about the history of the Mandalorians. The action scenes on the cruiser are awesome. Bryce Dallas Howard does a slightly better job than last season, I think. Honestly, Titus Welliver was a better Imperial officer in like 5 minutes of screen time than General Hux was in 3 entire movies. There are some downsides to this episode. The beginning feels a little bit slow-paced. The fight on the boat, which is this scene from the trailer, didn't really feel like it needed to be there. The 2 other Mandalorians with Katie Sackhoff felt a little bland. They didn't really have any personality. Once again, while this could just be seen as another filler side quest episode, it introduces Bo-Katan, who will become important later in the season, sets up Ahsoka's appearance, and subtly introduces what probably will be the main storyline of The Mandalorian Season 3. So, the next episode was called Chapter 12, The Siege. In this episode, we got to see Cara Dune and Greef Karga again, which was fun. This episode sets up a lot of intriguing mysteries and questions that I can't wait to see answered. Carl Weathers' direction is pretty solid. What this episode does well is it really helps progress the arcs of the main characters. For example, Mando. We see how connected he's become with Kara and Grief, and how much less withdrawn he is. It also helps progress Cara Dune's arc as she takes on the role of the Marshal and tries to clean up the town. As far as negatives go, I found the Mythrol character annoying. He just kind of seemed like a comedic side character that didn't really work. Next up was probably a lot of people's most anticipated episode, Chapter 13, The Jedi. We finally get to see Ahsoka Tano in live action. Honestly, I'm really surprised that there wasn't some big reveal scene. They just went ahead and showed her. Rosario Dawson does a pretty good job, more on her later. I'm glad that they let Dave Filoni write and direct this episode. After all, Ahsoka's reverse character assassination is probably the reason that he's number 2 over all of Star Wars, just behind George Lucas. Dave Filoni's direction improves a lot since the last time he directed.
Why don't you tell them yourself?
While he still doesn't quite have directing in live action 100% down, he's gotten noticeably better. There's also some kind of loose plot threads. It never really shows what happens to the villain. You know, did Ahsoka kill her, just imprison her, or what? Also, Ahsoka refusing to train Grogu feels a little bit forced. One, it's out of character for Ahsoka, and two, it just isn't really explained all that well. Also, Michael Biehn feels very, very wasted here. I wonder if this episode will serve as kind of a backdoor pilot to the Ahsoka series. Will that series focus on her trying to find Grand Admiral Thrawn? Next up is Chapter 14, The Tragedy, not of Darth Plagueis the Wise. When they first announced that Robert Rodriguez was going to direct an episode of this series, I was skeptical but also excited. I kind of thought, what's the director of Shorts and Shark Boy and Lava Girl gonna bring to Star Wars? But then I remembered that he also directed Sin City, From Dusk Till Dawn, and The Faculty. And I was reassured. He absolutely brought his A-game with this episode. He added his visceral, energetic shooting style to the action scenes. He manages to shoot it in a way so that the camera is always moving, adding a kinetic energy to the action, but never crossing over into shaky cam territory. I also love the way that he blocked the action scenes. He added a lot of cool set pieces that made the action more engaging. Tamira Morrison makes a triumphant return as Boba Fett, more on him later. I was way more emotional than I should have been when the Razor Crest got destroyed. When you have a series where the primary setting, in this case a ship, is constantly going on adventures with the characters, as well as playing a key role in the conflict of the story, constantly needing to be repaired, it really does start to feel like another character. Next up was Chapter 15, The Believer. Rick Famuyiwa returns from last season to helm a pretty solid episode. It's fun to see Mando assemble a team and have them go on a mission together. Bill Burr's Mayfeld is the best part of this episode. He gets a lot more character development, and Bill Burr gives a great performance. This episode adds a lot of depth and complexity to not just the series, but the universe as a whole. The ending escape sequence is exciting, suspenseful, and action-packed, and shows off how good the action in this series is. The final scene of this episode, where Mando reiterates Moff Gideon's threat from Season 1, gave me goosebumps. Last but certainly not least is Chapter 16, The Rescue. This is a pretty great season finale. Peyton Reed's direction is much better than in Chapter 10, but to be fair, he's working with a much stronger script. It's nice to see most of Mando's crew come together to fight Moff Gideon. Of course, I have to talk about the epic appearance of Mark Hamill himself as Luke Skywalker. I'll admit that I was surprised that they actually got him to appear. I didn't think they'd be able to pull off a CGI de-aged Mark Hamill on a TV budget, but then I remembered that the mouse has pockets about as big as the galaxy itself.
Alright now, get out there and make me some money!
It's awesome that we finally got to see Luke go into full Jedi Master mode and chop through the Dark Troopers like they're nothing. The scene where Mando says goodbye to Grogu is enough to make a grown man cry. I also love the post-credit scene where Boba Fett goes and reclaims Jabba's palace. I'm surprised that they didn't announce the series at Disney Investor Day. My only flaws with this episode is, one, the duel between Din Djarin and Moff Gideon felt a little too short. The ending of this episode also felt a little too sudden. We don't get to see what happened to the Darksaber, what Bo-Katan is going to do with all the extra Beskar. You know, are Din and Bo-Katan going to fight? We don't really know. Let's move on to my ranking of the episodes from this season. My least favorite is going to be Chapter 10, The Passenger, just because the direction is bad and it just feels like filler. In 7th place is going to be Chapter 11, The Heiress. Still a big jump up from Chapter 10, just has some scenes that don't really need to be there and has some bland characters. At number 6 is going to be Chapter 12, The Siege. Really good action, really good character arcs, really good acting. Just didn't really hit me as much as some of the other episodes did. Number 5 is going to be Chapter 9, The Marshal. Very well thought out, well executed, well written creature feature. Just wasn't as essential to the main storyline. At number 4 is The Jedi. Get to see my favorite female Star Wars character in live action. That was awesome. Just had some clunky direction. At number 3 is going to be Chapter 14, The Tragedy. Probably the best action in the entire series. Just feels a bit bare bones plot-wise. Number 2 is going to be Chapter 15, The Believer. Probably the best performance in the show so far. Adds a lot of lore and depth to the universe. Just isn't quite as impactful as my number 1 pick, which is Chapter 16, The Rescue, of course. Truly a great episode, possibly the best season finale this could have. Even though I'll admit the direction is a little bit clunky in this episode, it's just about the best season finale that Star Wars fans could ask for. That being said, let's move on to characters. Din Djarin / The Mandalorian's character growth continues from last season. He continues to bond with the child and develops a father-son-like relationship with him. He also continues to develop stronger connections with others. We see him continue his friendships with Greef Karga, Cara Dune, and Peli Motto, and also develop new friendships with Cobb Vanth, Ahsoka Tano, and Boba Fett. It's nice to see the character become more optimistic and hopeful and not be so closed off. Next up is the child / Grogu. Since this character is an animatronic puppet and also a baby, he doesn't have a huge amount of character development. We learn that his birth name is Grogu, but that's about it. I really love that they use an animatronic puppet for him instead of falling back on CGI. Tell him, Werner Herzog. Just because it shows Favreau's commitment to tangibility. Next up is Cobb Vanth, played by Timothy Olyphant. He manages to be the cocky flyboy, while at the same time not in a way that's derivative of previous Star Wars characters. It's nice to see Mando help him gain more confidence in who he is as a leader. Like I said before, the Frog Lady has pretty much no character development. The character's design is really weird and doesn't quite feel Star Wars-y. Katie Sackhoff makes a solid comeback as Bo-Katan. Her character never felt fully fleshed out in Clone Wars to me, and the series doesn't really add much. She mostly serves just to move the plot forward and introduce lore. I wish that there was a bit more to her as a character. We get to learn more about Cara Dune's backstory this season and get to see her grow as a character. When we first met her last season, she didn't really seem interested in any sort of larger conflict. Here, she decides to become the unofficial Marshal of Navarro before eventually becoming a Marshal of the New Republic. Greef Karga had an interesting little arc last season, but doesn't really do much here. The only reason he appears is just because it makes sense in universe. As I said before, Rosario Dawson does a pretty good job as Ahsoka. She manages to honor Ashley Eckstein's performance while at the same time add her own flavor. She doesn't try to copy Eckstein's voice, which I think was a good choice. However, some of the writing felt a little out of character. While I get that this version of the character is older and more mature, she just felt colder and less lively. Maybe she'll get more development in the Ahsoka series. Temuera Morrison returns to Boba Fett with a triumph. He makes the character more enigmatic, adding a level of intrigue that makes the character more mysterious. He manages to give the character a lot of personality while at the same time respecting previous iteration of the character. We see that he does have some sort of moral code, and isn't just an evil mercenary. I didn't really care for Ming-Na Wen's Fennec Shand in her debut episode last season, but she really grew on me here. We see her under Boba Fett transform from a soulless assassin to a disciplined sharpshooter. I can't wait to see what Dave Filoni does with her in The Bad Batch. Bill Burr's Mayfeld carries Episode 7. He plays a much more complex character than was previously depicted. The scene where he explains his philosophy to Mando adds a lot of depth that you wouldn't expect. We get to see someone who was once an Imperial officer but now hates the Empire. Burr also shows way more range than I ever thought he could. In the shot right before he kills the Night King, you can see his lip quiver as if he was about to cry. As for the main bad guy of the season, Moff Gideon, I wish the character had a little more depth to him. All he really is bad guy who wants to do bad things because bad. That being said, it is impossible for Giancarlo Esposito to give a bad performance. He adds so much nuance and personality to the character that it just about makes up for there being so little on paper. Let's move on to the themes. This season continues to explore and add on to the themes established in the first season. It continues to explore the father-son bond between Mando and the child. We see their bond grow to the point where they don't want to leave one another. This season explores how the strongest bonds are not the ones formed by origin, but by choice. For example, despite the fact that they are both Force-sensitive, Ahsoka does not care about Grogu nearly as much as Mando. Another example is Mando's relationship with Bo-Katan. Despite the fact that they are both Mandalorians, the two argue and are often at odds. Mando is much closer to Cara Dune and Greef Karga. So overall, this season is a very strong continuation of the series. It continues everything that worked in the first season while adding so much more to the characters in the universe. The series has everything that makes Star Wars great. It blends intimate character dynamics with operatic and mythic storytelling. I'm gonna give it a positive review. So yeah, that's it. That was my thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 2. What did y'all think of this season? Was it better than the first? Not quite as good as the first? I personally think I liked it a bit more than Season 1. Whatever y'all thought, let me know down in the comments below. What videos do you guys want to see? Do you guys want to see more Star Wars content, Marvel content, Disney Plus related stuff? Would you guys like me to do more indie stuff? Are there any other TV shows you guys would love to hear my thoughts on? Let me know down in the comments below. If you guys want to know my thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 1, here's the video right here. If you guys want to see my thoughts on other Star Wars related media, I'll be sure to put a link to my Star Wars playlist down in the description. As always, thank you guys very much. Be sure to subscribe. Bye.